Hello, everybody. I'll just give a few seconds for everybody's Zoom to load and for folks to come on in. Welcome, welcome. Nice to see everybody here today. My name's Stephanie, and I am the program manager at Take Me Outside. And if you are just joining us for the first time and you missed out on yesterday, well then welcome. And if you are brand new to Take Me Outside, welcome. It's so great to have you here. And if you are returning either just from yesterday or you've been to one of our events or workshops before, welcome back. And it's so lovely to have you all here today. And it's morning time for me, but if you're in the Eastern time zone, then maybe you are almost ready for lunch, but thanks for joining in. This is the 13th Take Me Outside day that we've had. So 13 years of this, and now it's a whole week of fun and events and speakers and activities. So if you were here yesterday, then maybe you heard my explanation. So sorry if there's any repetition here, but if you're new, Take Me Outside Day started when our executive director, Colin Harris, ran across Canada and ended his run across Canada with this celebration of outdoor learning that we're all gathered here for today. So our general mission at Take Me Outside is to encourage learners and educators to spend more time outdoors and make that a regular part of their everyday learning experience. So I'm joining in today from Coatson territory on Vancouver Island in BC in Canada. And if you know where you're joining in from, whether that's the traditional territories and the nation's land that you're on, or if you wanted to write and say hello into the chat, then please do that. And I would love to see where everyone's joining in from today. So feel free to use the chat. You can set the chat to be typing to either everybody or to just the host and the panelists. So that's up to you to decide. And when you're typing into the chat, you can either be typing your reactions or you can be typing questions. And you can also use the Q&A box. So you can either use the chat or there's a separate function for the Q&As. And within the Q&As, if you see a question you really like, you can upvote it so that it goes up to the top, and we'll be keeping track of all your questions. And we have time at the end to get to as many of those as we can. We had a lot of amazing questions yesterday, so please keep those coming. And if you enter a question, we will be drawing randomly from those for all of our prizes at the end. So stay to the end. We're going to have prizes. It's going to be awesome. We're going to stick to our hour timeline. So we will be done at 12:30 Pacific and 3:30 Eastern. Did I get that wrong? No, I'll be done at 9:30 Pacific, 12:30 Eastern. There we go. Too many time zones to keep track of. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Jade in a moment here. So I have Jade Berrill with me today from the Outdoor Learning Store, the Director of Learning there. And I work with Jade really closely in many things, and I'm so happy that she's here joining me today. Jade and I co-host workshops for educators together, and sometimes we get to hang out in person, but oftentimes we're on screens together from different parts of BC where we live. So I'm going to pass it over to Jade and let her do the honors of introducing our special guest today and starting that conversation.
Hi, good morning, everyone, or leading into the afternoon, depending where you are. Indeed, my name is Jade Berrill, and I'm the Director of Learning at the Outdoor Learning Store. We're a charitable non-profit dedicated to getting people like you outside for learning and making sure that you and your educators and anyone in your life who's interested have access to the tools, equipment, and resources to do so. I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territory of the Sinixt. Sinixt means the people of the bull trout. This is the Columbia River, and I live just around the corner from round that bend, this side, round that bend. And so for me, land acknowledgements are not just about like, this is the people, because this place is also, I have friends and from the Secwepemc, the Secwepemc, the Okanagan Silks and the Tanaha who have names for this place, who utilize this place, who love this place too, have created technology that enabled them to build relationship with the land, with the plants, the animals, all beings on it. And it's a big thing for me. It's not just like to say their names, but like, what does that actually mean to me? Like, what's, you know, what, and what does that inspire me to do? Like, why do I care? And I think one of the biggest things is I was just recently away and I came back and forward happened, right? The leaves were changing. And I'm aware of the fact that the bears, there's lots of talk about bears where we are and into Alberta, who are like grizzly bears coming into like populated places. And we've got a little slope behind our house where the neighborhood black bear drags anyone who leaves their garbage out. They drag the garbage down into our backyard, and my little dog tries to see the bear off, and it all gets very complex. And I think one of the biggest things is that the relationships that I built with my Indigenous friends, elders, knowledge keepers, or that knowledge has the capacity to share information with us that can help us move forward. So this is like some information that's been around for millennia, but it's like how that knowledge is still relevant and how it enables me to understand that if I could plant certain bushes, trees, if we could build that slightly upslope out of town where it's leading to the forest, that we might create a food barrier between bears needing to come into our towns. That's what I'm working on. So getting some amazing information is sort of inspiring me to do a bit better in trying to maintain these relationships with the animals who've been here much longer than the humans. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at the minute. But that's enough about me. I'm going to introduce a very exciting person today. And this is Chúk Odenigbo. So proudly Franco-Albertan. Chúk Odenigbo, there he is, explores the links between environment, human health, and social justice. He's currently a doctoral candidate in medical geography. Woohoo! I'm a geographer too. Love that. At the University of Ottawa. And he holds a master's degree from the Université de Montréal, the School of Public Health. He's been involved in projects that focus on the health benefits in natural spaces, including Parks Victoria's Healthy Parks, Healthy People initiative. Chúk has also taken part in international conferences such as the Salzburg Global Seminar and the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. If you don't know what any of that is, it's big stuff. Big deal stuff, you know. So he's been talking about the link between environment and health for a long time. And outside of this, he's actively involved in initiatives to reimagine and reform our systems for like the well-being of all beings, human and non-human. I'm really excited to hang out and ask you some questions today, Chúk. Thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Bon matin tout le monde. Good morning, everyone.
Woohoo. All right. So for anyone who doesn't know, like, sort of, you know, that was an intro, but who are you and like what you doing, what do you care about, and how did you get to where you are now, like becoming a doctor? Where's that passion come from? Big question.
Ooh, what a massive question. So I think so when I was younger, when I was very young, I struggled with the idea of being perceived. And I know that sounds really weird to say. I used to have a lot of like existential crises, but basically what I mean to say is I struggled with the idea that I could be seen, but not seen. And I finally have the language for it. At that time, I did not have these words for it, but there's this term called hermeneutic injustice. And so hermeneutic injustice is a really interesting type of injustice because it effectively refers to the injustice of not knowing your own needs or wants because you don't see yourself reflected in your society. Mm. And so as a result of that, way back when, I constantly felt like I was some sort of like background character in the show. I was like, am I real? Am I not real? Like, am I perceived? Am I not perceived? You know, going through all those existential moments. And I remember there's this really powerful quote by Christian Bombin, which I'll put the quote in the chat box. It is a beautiful French quote, but basically it translates to every time I walk by a tree, I put my hand on a tree trunk, not to confirm that the tree exists, because that I have no doubt, but to confirm my own existence. And so I always found this sort of peace in nature where I got a break from like these existential crises and wondering if I'm real and wondering who I am, because nature felt very sort of familiar. It felt like, okay, no matter who I am or what I am, I'm here, I'm present, and I'm embraced as I am. And so I found a lot of solace in nature spaces. That being said, though, given that I've never sort of seen people like me in the society that we are reflected by, I never believed that I could be an environmentalist. I was just like, oh, I like nature, but you know, it is what it is, right? Because at that time, when we thought about environmentalists, we used to think of, you know, typically men, honestly, in khaki clothes.
Elbow patches.
With those patches, who are like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna like, you know, cut myself off from the world, like, toss myself on the side and kayak across the country. You know what I mean? That's what you thought of when you thought of environmentalists and someone who like loved nature. Or at some point in transition to being sort of the very hippie stereotype of, I've chained myself to a tree, you cannot cut this tree. And I was like, I'm neither of those people. So I guess I'm not an environmentalist. But when I started university, I remember taking environmental science courses for fun. And I was just like, oh, it's just for fun. You know, I can't build a career in this, but this is just for fun. And I remember in my third year, I had a prof who was a little bit of a hippie, who for our final exam, she said, you've got 2 weeks to change the world and submit proof, and I'll mark that. Or you can do a literature review. So at the time, I was modeling. And so I had a bunch of friends who were models. I had a bunch of friends who were photographers. And I checked municipal bylaws first. And then we set up this early morning photo shoot where we were nude in a park. This idea of like Adam and Eve, you know, nature, going back to nature, all that stuff. But we were there with like computers and books and phones and like all the modernities. And this like photo series was titled like My Green Dream, this idea that human beings can reconnect with nature and re-enter into harmony with nature without losing all the progress we've made, because a lot of the messaging at that time was, oh, we have to go backwards in time in order to be good for the environment. And so it was avant-garde, it was fun, but what was wild, and this is the turning point for me, is that the photo series got published on the United Nations website. And I was like, okay. And then, and as a result of that photo series and it getting published on the UN website and making a little bit of a buzz, I got named one of the top 25 environmentalists under 25 in Canada. And so that hit me really hard, because I was like, wait, this means that like my messaging resonates with other people. This means that I can be an environmentalist, that my viewpoint is valid. And so that's when I really started entering into environmental spaces, taking up space, sharing my thoughts, and all that fun stuff. And it's been a whirlwind ever since.
I'm so, that's awesome. Yeah, look at all those reactions. People are stoked. And I think I love what you say is that anybody is an environmentalist, and any way you choose to express that, any way that your creativity, your ways of thinking, knowing and being come out is so important, and your individuality is important. And I think as young people, I hope now there's like people like you, like honestly the work you're doing and other people in this field that say, yeah, it doesn't have to look a certain way, it doesn't have to be a certain way. You bring what you've got, bring your skills, bring your talents, and we're here for it. That's epic. And if you want to do a sort of version of what Chip did, which doesn't involve nakedness, maybe in the classroom, I've done like a history timeline of technology in relation to science and how that's changed from like early hominians, early humans up to the modern day. So if you want to like have a go, but you know, there are some options. Very creative, and that's a big thing that you did. So like we're here to talk a little bit about climate, right? And I love that you've led into that about there's social justice as well, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But like, what do the students here, middle to high school students, maybe you can text in the chat how old you are, or what grades you're in, what do they need to know about up-to-date climate research? Like, what are some, like, and that's big, but like, again, like a few key points, something that they should know about?
Oh, to try and give you info that you're not going to get necessarily in your class. So there's basically 3 types of climate research. This is a very gross generalization, but there's basically 3 types of climate research, right? There's climate research that's very heavily focused on the hard sciences, right? So it's, here's the quantity of carbon tons of greenhouse gas emissions that we have been able to like detect in the atmosphere. Here is XYZ, like it's very sort of, here are the number of species that are going extinct, and here are the ways in which this species does XYZ and how this habitat is changing. So there's that kind of climate research. Then there's more social climate research, which is, and this is becoming more prominent and becoming more relevant as people sort of gain the language to express their own emotions, their own feelings, their own experiences, is research around, eco-anxiety, which are the feelings that come from a changing climate and not being able to do anything about it. There's research around the social impacts of nature and the social impacts of climate change, and some really interesting sort of rabbit holes to go down where we start realizing just how much climate change is linked to a lot of social phenomena we're seeing today, right? Like if we're seeing the rise of popularism in politics, for example, and that is actually linked to climate change as well. So there's that type of research. But then what's really exciting, and you alluded to this in your land acknowledgement, is more and more in Western society, and when I say Western society, I'm going to say Canada specifically because I'm not entirely sure what's happening in Europe or the US, we are recognizing the validity and the importance of Indigenous knowledges. And so more and more we're seeing 2I seeing being used as a framework in climate change research, where we're combining science with Indigenous knowledges to better understand the impacts of the changing climate and ways in which we can try and either reverse that or build resiliency to maintaining a livable life, essentially.
And that's so important. And I think this is a big thing because for a lot of students, let's say we've got loads from like grade 5, 6, 7 here, the climate science, as someone who did climate degree and Chúk, who's like dedicated many years to understanding it, it's still quite complex. It's quite difficult at this age to understand the layers of feedback and forcing and all these things that we're studying to understand past climate and look at the future. But what you can do when you are a human and you have feelings and you look at your society and your community and looking at the impacts there, that's when you, whatever age you are, can make real change, because you can implement things in your life, in the way you think, feel, connect with people, that can really do an interesting stuff. So what are some of the ways that climate change impacts us that maybe we haven't thought about, or maybe like in our schools we maybe haven't had space to chat about yet?
Absolutely. I think this is so important, right? Like, so climate change impacts a lot of really interesting things in our life that we don't necessarily think about or associate directly with climate change, right? So I think one of the understandings of climate change that's a little bit more obvious for adults, I don't know if it's as obvious for younger people, is the link between climate change and the economy. So in Canada, a large chunk of our economy is very much based around the environment, right? Whether it's natural resource extraction, forestry, fishing, that sort of thing, but then also ecotourism, right? Tourism around the environment. And so a large chunk of our economy, a large chunk of the work that our parents do, the work our grandparents did, whatnot, is very much linked to the environment. And so as we witness the impacts of climate change, we also witness a downturn of the economy, which leads to cost of living crises, which leads to housing crises as well. And so it leads to a lot of the issues that we're seeing perpetuated in mainstream media. And so as a function of that, we then see people making decisions coming from this loss of value or loss of hope, because, and this is where all the fun links start coming into play. In the way our society functions, we tend to, in a patriarchal society, give men value and worth based off of their ability to provide for their family, financially speaking. And so when climate change has negatively impacted the economy, creating an economic downturn, which has a lot of, and I'm going to use men specifically, which has a lot of men losing their jobs, what effectively then sort of happens, a lot of men experience higher rates of depression, because now they don't know who they are, because their identity is so strongly linked to being a provider and being a financial provider and seeing value in themselves as a financial provider, which leads to an increase in suicide in men. But it also leads to an increase in domestic violence against women as a way of reasserting their masculinity, because there was this really interesting study demonstrated that if you threaten the masculinity of a man, oftentimes he will look to violence as a way of reclaiming that masculinity. And so then you see this increase in domestic violence and unsafe living situations. Then if you take the female version of that, so you say, climate change, economic downturn, women are losing jobs, especially because women tend to be very prominent in environmental fields, very prominent in tourist fields as well. So they tend to be on the front lines of job loss. Then you have women losing their financial autonomy, which forces a lot of women to be more reliant on a man financially, which then exacerbates the abuse that can then take place as a result of that. So I've got some of those really interesting, cycles that to fall through, as just an example. But in other examples, I mentioned earlier the ways in which politics becomes more popularist. So again, with a changing climate, it changes the ways in which we have access to resources, but it also puts pressure on existing society in order to force the society to change, to adapt to the changing climate, to the changing environment. To take a step back, one of the things that's really key in highlighting is just how important it is to recognize that human beings are linked to the environment and are shaped by the environment, and in turn shape the environment, which in turn shapes human beings as well. It's a continuous cycle. And so as climate change changes our environment, it means that we in turn are changed by climate change, and our needs change, our wants change, our society has to change. But oftentimes our society doesn't like changing because we built a capitalistic society. And so people do their best to maintain the status quo. Especially in Canada, we've got a culture of, if it ain't broke, why fix it? That is our culture in Canada. We do not break things unless they are broken. We do not try and fix things unless we are truly suffering. And so as a function of that, we're always trying to maintain this level of status quo. And so when climate change threatens the status quo, what effectively happens in politics, especially for career politicians, is they're trying to look for ways to stay in power. And they know that change is always unpopular, right? Like when Canada adopted the maple leaf as its flag, it was wildly unpopular. Like 60% of the population was against it. They wanted to keep the Union Jack. And now people will die for that maple leaf. Right, when Canada was adopting the metric system, there was an entire revolt in the entire province of Alberta being like, this is liberal, this is stupid, and hot. And now Canadians are so proud that they're on the metric system, and they show off to Americans being like, look, we're on the metric system and you're still in peril, hot. Right, so change is incredibly unpopular, even though it'll be popular later on, even though it's necessary later on. But in the moment, it's so unpopular that any politician who advocates for change effectively is shooting themselves in the foot. And so what you'll see politicians do is they'll look for scapegoats. They'll look for people to blame. They'll look for groups to marginalize, to take that anger, because oftentimes when there's massive societal shifts, there's a wave of anger that comes in. And so what they do is they redirect that anger towards a scapegoat, because that is the easiest way to show that you're doing something without actually doing anything, which leads to a rise in popularism, which then leads to the kind of divisive politics that we have today. So those are just two examples, but climate change is fascinatingly linked to so many things. And I think we don't think about those far-reaching consequences enough in our conversations around climate change.
Amazing. And like some of these terms like populism and things, like for young people, like one of the big things in life that I discovered as I got older and became what I call a decision maker, right? I could vote, I could have these things, is that and if social media does a really good job of this with these algorithms, right, that are designed to give you what you like. So for anyone who's using social media, you can react if you want, like even TikTok, you know, any of these different things. Then when you say you've liked something, it's going to give you more like that. So what it does is it reflects your own thoughts and feelings at you again and again, confirming your sort of bias, right, of what you want to see. And it doesn't give you the alternate viewpoints. One of the big things I'm seeing and what I'm hearing you talking about, Chúk, is this need for humanity and the depths that this can impact on our relationships and our family structures, on the way we treat each other, is that we have to be able to move and adapt. As our environment changes, we've got to move. And whilst change is difficult, I know it myself personally, and you will know it as you're growing, going through school. New teachers are difficult, new environments, new classes, new subjects that you've got to learn. Is that what we're asking, or what I believe is really important, is rather than just like, this is my position, this is my thoughts, I'm going to stick with it, is being a bit open. If someone presents some interesting information to you, then being open to saying, okay, I didn't agree with that, or I haven't thought about it that way, but I'm really interested in having a conversation with you about it. And I think that can be a really important part of work that we can do on this. So, all right, students, young people, want to get involved in understanding what they can do for climate change. Like, can we come up with some ways that they can themselves, young people, get involved in climate change, the fight for climate change, the fight against climate change, and also a fight for climate justice? So maybe can we define those two things and then say how these students can get involved?
Absolutely. So I think people often conflate the fight against climate change with the fight for climate justice, and they're not the same thing, right? So the fight against climate change is, stuff that we see on the regular basis, right? It's like, oh, we need to switch to like electric vehicles, to stop driving like gas cars. Oh, we need to, consume less XYZ, buy more local, right? That is all very much fighting against climate change, right? We're trying to minimize how much greenhouse gas emissions we produce. We're trying to minimize how much pollution we release into the atmosphere. And we're trying to take actions to actively minimize how much we're contributing to the climate crisis. And those are important, right? But the fight for climate justice is different, right? The fight for climate justice recognizes that the ways in which we interact with our environment and the ways in which we interact with each other are linked, and that we cannot have a society that is respectful of the environment if the society is not respectful of the different peoples within that society. Right. So if we take nature, for example, the environment tends to be female coded. So that means we tend to talk about like Mother Nature, right? When we're talking about anything like water related and you see something in the water, you're like, oh, there she blows, right? Boats are always women, right? Like you've got all these like very sort of like female-based ways of viewing and interacting with the environment. And human beings are the only animal, as far as we know, that personifies things to the point of seeing them as a human, right? Like if I, show you a pencil and name the pencil Bob, and then I snap Bob in half, you're gonna be like, oh no, poor Bob.
Yeah,
right?
Even just you visualizing it made my heart hurt.
Right, and so as a function of that, we effectively do see and treat nature as a woman. And so in a society that still struggles with like the gender pay gap, in a society that still struggles with like equality between the sexes, in a society that still struggles with like women in STEM and women in the trades and what's a woman's job and where a woman's place is, how can a society that still has that ideology somehow be respectful of the environment that is a woman, right? And so climate justice recognizes that we have to pair the fight for social justice with the fight against climate change in order to truly enact and affect change. And so earlier on, I gave the example of fighting against climate change is switching to an electric vehicle. But climate justice is recognizing that electric vehicles are incredibly expensive. They're new to the market. Most people can't afford them. And when you look at the way money is distributed in Canada, money is very much distributed across racial lines. And so it also sort of means that people of color, especially, have less access to electric vehicles than white people. And then it creates this disparity of, oh, white people are good for the environment, people of color are not good for the environment. And so recognizing those implications and putting in place subsidy programs or, finding other ways of distributing that, right? So there's this really interesting paper, scientific paper, read it when you're in university, that talks about the conundrum of electric vehicles in Canada, since our government is pushing very hard for electric vehicles. And it highlights that one of the biggest failings of our government is, instead of pushing for electric vehicles, we should be pushing for better public transit infrastructure, especially between municipalities. And we're not doing that. And that on its own would be a climate justice move, because that would allow young people to be able to get around without having to buy, a beat up car and fixing it on their own. It would allow, new immigrants to be able to sort of just hop into Canada and be like, cool, let me get around without having to buy a car. Let me get around without having to already have made it financially, right? It would allow people to share space with each other as well, because studies demonstrate that when people share space, for example, in public transit, they are more likely to respect one another and feel a sense of community, versus when people are in the individual vehicles, they feel isolated, they don't feel that sense of community, they don't feel an obligation to the neighbor either. So there's all of these implications that come with the electric vehicle movement that could be fixed by simply transitioning that same energy to public transit.
That's huge. That's really big. And I think this sounds, for the teachers or educators who are watching, like an epic lesson plan for debates of getting your students to do some research on the actual social justice behind some of these different, rather than just doing like an energy debate. Why don't we look at what the social things that are connected to that, and this deeper thought about who we are as a community? And I do see some people in the chat talking personally, and I've done this too: native planting, picking up litter, using less energy in our classrooms or our home, hanging out your laundry, turning the water tap off when you're brushing your teeth, all that stuff, that personal stuff. What's really interesting, and this is what I think ties into so many relationships with place. And if the fact that some people don't have access or feel disconnected, and when we feel disconnected from something, we don't care about it, and then we don't put our effort into it. So like what Chúk, you're saying about this greater social connection of what it all thinks and means, like, that's big stuff. And that gets me thinking outside of even just the things we definitely know we can do, and there's lists of those, of like, okay, how can I think about where I want to put my vote, or where I want to put my energy if I'm volunteering or looking at my community? Where are these changes? And access is a huge thing. Not everybody has access in the same way, or has been treated fairly when they do get access. And so I really hope that the students listening are sparking a little bit of a way of looking at things that's a little bit different from the norm. Okay, I think we've got time for just like one more thing before we go in. And so we're talking, and you mentioned this as your second pillar of, or second part of sort of climate change research, and that's about calming or about anxiety or stress around this. And I'm wondering if you've got some ideas about how we can like reduce our anxiety or stress around climate change, and maybe create spaces to talk about this, because as someone who's studied it and who's in it and living, with unprecedented wildfires and floods and landslides, then as a result of the slopes losing their rooted support systems when the fires came through, of Indigenous communities around the corner to me losing everything this summer, how, what can we do? Like, how do we move forward?
So I think the first piece is to recognize that it is very logical, very normal, very human, in fact, to have these emotions, right? I think, and this is, there's a debate going on around the term eco-anxiety simply because of the word anxiety, because anxiety is often sort of that idea of, fears that are not based in reality, and how do we address those? But eco-anxiety is very much based in reality, and it's a very normal reaction. And so I think the first piece is to recognize how normal it is to feel anxious about the state of the world, how normal it is to feel, either a sense of stress, sense of anger, sense of hopelessness. There's a myriad of emotions that you can feel when you are learning about climate change, when you are confronting the realities of climate change. And it's normal. And I think that's the first piece and the key element, right? Is eco-anxiety isn't treated in the same way as regular anxiety, because eco-anxiety therapists need to sort of address how normal it is and give you the tools to navigate this new normal versus, the tools to try and shut it out. So there's that piece, it's normal. But in the next piece is that many studies have demonstrated, and this is not just studies, right? We also see this repeated in different forms of knowledges, indigenous knowledges, Black knowledges, different forms of knowledges. Connection with the land often helps with addressing eco-anxiety, because eco-anxiety, as you mentioned, Jade, comes from a place of feeling helpless, of feeling powerless, of feeling like there's nothing you can do. And as you connect with nature, and when I say connect with nature, I mean connect with nature on your own terms. What tends to happen is you tend to know what it is that you need to do based off of your connection with the environment. And so recognizing that everyone has a different connection with the environment. And so when I say connect with nature, oftentimes people assume that I mean like go camping, go hiking, go for a walk in the park. And that works for some people, right? That absolutely works for some people. But for other people, that's not the case. One of the initiatives that I had started a while ago was called The Poison and the Apple. It was named after my favorite Disney movie, which was Snow White. But The Poison and the Apple, the objective was to help people connect with nature outside of the traditional ways of connecting with the environment. For example, we hosted a fashion show in an aquarium. And the idea behind the fashion show was to show clothing made by local designers that embeds ocean ethics, i.e. the fabrics that they use do not create microplastic pollution in the ocean. The way they source them doesn't, create, greenhouse gas emissions, all these different things. And so they imbue that and imbue these values into their clothing. And so the fashion show was set up in a way that people who love fashion can connect with nature simply via the fashion that they wear. Right? And then via the fashion that you wear, that is on its own climate action, because now you are supporting brands that work in a very specific way, and you're shifting away from fast fashion, you're shifting away from unethical fashion, you're shifting away from unhealthy consumerism, and you're moving towards a fashion that is circular, a fashion that is cyclical, a fashion that is, built around the environment, but also a fashion that is local, a fashion that supports your local economy, a fashion that supports a healthy wage for its workers. And so, it's creating those changes. We did une soirée francophone pour les océans, where we kind of addressed, and this was in BC, so we kind of were like, if you speak French and you're in BC, the French is coming from across the ocean, which means you owe the ocean a debt, right? So what are your, what do you need to be doing to recognize the ocean, to promote ocean literacy as a Francophone? And we had those conversations. When we had deep and meaningful conversations centered around identity, and how identity gives us responsibilities, and how those responsibilities, when enacted upon, do good for the planet, right? We did this project where we had young people in around Woodstock, Ontario, sort of dive into like the local water bodies and clean them up with like a metal detector, and just sort of clean up the water bodies, and then write a report outlining everything that they were able to pick up from the water body to the municipal government to be like, hey, here's what we found, do a better job. And that was their way of connecting, right? Because they were able to connect to the local community, they were able to serve their local community, and they were able to connect with water bodies in the local community, right? So these are just a couple of examples, but essentially each of these ways of connecting with nature is different. It's unique. You know, there's some that will resonate with some people, some that will not resonate with other people. So I think as a young person, one of the things that you can sort of do is find the ways in which you feel good in nature, right? Do you feel good sitting on a park bench watching a movie that you downloaded on your tablet? Do you feel good going for a walk or a hike? Do you feel good whitewater river rafting? Where do you feel perceived by the environment? How do you feel perceived by the environment? Build that connection and deepen that connection with the environment and deepen that connection with the land. That's like step one. And that's going to ease a lot of your eco-anxiety, because every time you're feeling these feelings of hurt, you're feeling these feelings of fear about the future and about the unknown, you go back to nature, you go back to the land that you call home, and you re-engage in those connections in order to find tools of empowerment, right? And then as you find those tools of empowerment, you then sort of have that imagination of here's what I need to do for either myself, for my community, for the environment, or for the country in general, right? It's my entryway into environmentalism was very much being like, I love fashion, I love modeling, and I have this dream that when we connect with nature, we don't feel this feeling that, oh, I'm a bad person for using my cell phone in a park. And that was a game changer for me, because that allowed me to realize we can do that and we can find ways of harmonizing with the environment. And so finding your way, finding your turning point, I think is a key component. And then the other component, of course, is connecting with community. I think as a young person, if, using my own experience, it's not always evident who your community is, right? And so if you already know who your community is, phenomenal, connect with them. But if you do not know who your community is yet, that's totally fine. It just means that you've got some self-exploration to do. You've got some introspection to question sort of who are you? How do you show up in spaces? What spaces make you feel safe? Which are the communities that reflect that? And then begin connecting with those communities as well. Yeah.
Amazing. One of the things I hear and that I really love when I hear you speak is like if you talk about identity, like if I just look at myself, for example, like one of my identities and relationships with nature is mountain biking. Like it means a lot to me. I like to go fast. I feel like I'm a bird flying, right? And it's this thing. Firstly, like expensive sport, right? Saved for my first bike, and then just like gradually upgraded little bits of it. And some of us will be lucky enough to learn how to ride a bike, some of us haven't. But one of the big things is that a lot of mountain bikers in my community are very against logging, right? Because the trees cut down and it's the things. But all of the access places, the roads, the parking, all of these things came out of forest service roads as a result of prior logging. So it's like this thing of like, well, I don't like that unless it helps me, but then I don't like the other bit. And I think one of the big things for me, and I hope, and this is what being an amazing scientist and an amazing knowledgeable human is, right? In any topic, but especially in this one, is multiple things can be true at once. And you can love fashion, which generally is perceived as a highly wasteful and destructive industry, like so many, but there are ways that you can take action to do your thing. We also have a bunch of kids who love fashion here, and we did clothing swaps, right? So the t-shirt that you don't want anymore, rather than it going in the landfill, you get to swap with your classmates, because once you're bored of it, it'll be fun and interesting for someone else. We also used old t-shirts we didn't want to make no-sew shopping bags, recyclable shopping bags. And then we used the leftover scraps to make superhero masks, and we were eco-superheroes, and we did a fashion shoot. We did a trashion show where we made clothes only from waste that we found. Like there's so many ways that you can do these things, and you can still ride your bike, and you can still, your family probably owns a car, or if it doesn't own a car, you probably do some other things that like maybe you feel guilty about, or that the society tells you is negative, right? So here's my thought, is that we're all doing our best. And if you can make these and investigate, like you say, dive in, introspection means looking inside, have a look. What is important to you, and what could you actually do? And you'll find there's lots of opportunities for you to take action yourself, personally and within your school community or your home community or whatever. And so it's really exciting. I listening to what you're saying, it gets me excited. It makes me think about all of the possibilities that are out there for us to do things. So thank you for inspiring me with that.
No, absolutely. I think one thing that I always sort of remember, and I think it always sort of reminds me in moments of guilt, is Thomas Edison invented the light bulb using candlelight. Right? Like we live the society we live in, and so we have to use the tools that we have to use, right? I own a car, it's a gas car because I can't afford an electric vehicle because I live in the middle of nowhere, and if I don't have a car, I cannot go anywhere. But I also recognize that we can make the world better despite having to use what society's tools force us to use, because until we have something better, we use what it is that we use. And so Thomas Edison invented the light bulb using candlelight.
What we're going to invent next, I believe in each and every one of you listening here. And talking of that, there's some cool questions coming in from the audience. So maybe for the last 13 minutes or so, we can hang out with some of them. Miss Bickerstaff's class, and this was a question I was going to talk to you about anyway, but I'm wondering what kind of jobs are available to fix or work on climate change.
This is interesting because it's changing all the time. And so by the time you're in the workforce, there may be new jobs out there. But honestly, there's a plethora of different ways in which we can sort of work towards climate change, especially given the different impacts that climate change has. So there's jobs that focus directly on climate change itself, your standard sort of like scientist, researcher, that sort of thing. There's jobs that focus on decision-making collectively as a society in order to enact the measures that we learn are good for fighting against climate change. So things like, politician, city councillor, a higher up in a large company, a large organization, CEO, all that fun stuff. And then there is, positions that seek to give us new tools to use in society. So things like engineer, things like, mainly engineer, technician, mechanician, all that fun stuff. But then you've also got jobs that center climate resilience. And so climate resilience is different from climate action. Climate resilience is climate change is happening. How can we make society ready for it and save lives, save, X, Y, Z. And so when we look at climate resilience, that's when you're looking at jobs like social worker, you're looking at jobs like teacher, you're looking at jobs that are seeking to help society become prepared, both economically, in terms of skills, in terms of whatnot. You've got urban planner, for example, right? Urban planners are very good at helping a community become climate resilient, depending on, setting up more parks and more green spaces and, more public transit, things like that. And then you've got people like someone put in the comment, farmers, and farmers can very much be on the climate action side, but they can also be on the climate adaptation side, right? So there's farmers, for example, who started growing tropical foods in Canada because they're like, well, climate's changing, so we'll be able to grow these foods anyways. I might as well switch. And so that's one, that's climate adaptation, that's climate resilience. But then there's also farmers that are, looking to minimizing the environmental impact of their farming, and that would be climate action. So there's a whole host, and honestly, realistically speaking, climate change is a little bit like public health. Like, it's a job of everybody. And so because it's the job of everybody, no matter what role you're in, there is a way that you can take into consideration the climate and build in either climate action or climate resilience. So last week, for example, I was actually at a conference for the Canadian Association of Midwives. And for those of you who don't know, midwives help women give birth. And they were like, what can we do for climate change? right? Because they recognize that as midwives, they also have a role to play in climate action and climate resilience. And they have a very sort of unique role in that they help in the life-giving process. And so we had those conversations. So all of that to say is most of the jobs you can get in this world, whether you go for being a carpenter or a plumber or whatnot, there are ways in which you can approach that work with a climate lens. And then if you're specifically wanting to work on climate change itself, oftentimes because of how new climate change is, and I say new in the sense that it's not new, like, we've known about climate change since, the 1980s, but it's new in the sense that, we're acting on it at a more grassroots level, since we're recognizing that there's not enough action and leadership happening higher up. And so people are inventing their own jobs all the time. I had to create my own job. Most people are creating their own jobs and finding their own ways of making it financially feasible. This was actually, funny enough, one of the questions we had discussed, Jade, is who's doing really interesting work in this space. And so maybe if we could dive into that as a way to give an example of what some people are doing. So in Peterborough, there is a phenomenal environmentalist. Her name is Patricia Wilson, and she runs an organization called the Diverse Nature Collective. And so what she does is she specifically helps newcomers and people of color connect with nature and connect with the environment, find their own connections, find their own ways in which they can interact with the environment, in order to get them engaged in conservation and to get them engaged in land protection. You've got Judith Kasama in British Columbia, who runs an organization called Color the Trails. And so she focuses on not just educating people of color on how to be in environmental spaces, but also educating society in general as to how to make nature spaces welcoming for all, given the ways in which nature has been used as a tool of harm and a tool of exclusion, and making nature like a certain a certain club that you're not allowed into, and so sort of trying to really break that mold. You've got Daniel Raven Ellison, who works for the National Geographic, and he did something incredible. He turned the city of London, England, into the first ever urban park. And so the entire city is now considered an urban park and comes with all the protections that a park has, recognizing urban natural diversity. So not just the plants, but also the animals that appear in urban spaces, they're now protected in the city of London. And it was a job and a half, because he had to convince every ward individually. And some wards would have political changeover after he's done convincing them. He has to go back and reconvince them before they can fully have a vote to make it happen. You've got people like Julius Lindsay, who works for the David Suzuki Foundation, and is looking to make climate justice a form of formal advocacy that the David Suzuki Foundation engages in, so that the David Suzuki Foundation is able to be socially conscious in the environmental advocacy that they push and they propose. You've got Abe Singh Satchel, who runs Break the Divide, based out of Surrey in British Columbia. And so Break the Divide pairs young people together to have conversations around climate and have conversations around their experiences, to co-produce knowledge, because young people come with knowledge through their lived experiences. And what Break the Divide does is seeks to galvanize that knowledge and transition that knowledge from empathy into action. And then you've got, Chloe Dragonsmith, who runs Bush Kids in the Northwest Territories. And so Bush Kids is this program that she created that actually pairs with the public school in Yellowknife, where every Wednesday and Friday, the kids don't go to class in school, but instead go to class with elders, indigenous and non-indigenous kids all go to class with elders, where they learn tools on the land, right? So they're taught how to skin fish, they're taught how to skin bison and skin moose and bear, and how to stitch things, and how to hunt, and how to, build an igloo. And they taught all these very practical skills, and they taught indigenous knowledge, right? They taught stories, dances, and all these different things to allow them to connect with nature and to feel confident in nature, because that helps ease that eco anxiety of, if the world goes to crash, I still have all the skills to survive in this world. So those are just a couple of examples of the ways in which people took their climate action, transformed it into paid work, and are making meaningful change in climate spaces.
I can't even, that's amazing. And I've met Judy, and I was actually part of a guiding team for when Colour the Trails came to my community, taking people into the backcountry skiing. And it was one of the most powerful events I've ever attended in terms of the energy and the thought processes that came from the collective people that joined that event. And so I was deeply honoured to be a part of that. I think for me, what you're saying is that there are so many different ways that you can utilize this. I mean, even the local builders here, several of my friends, they're taking the waste scraps of wood and working with a local artist who's making sculptures out of it, or making furniture for people in need, or new immigrants who maybe don't have all of their resources in a home yet. Reducing your food waste, firstly, by maybe learning to make your own snack bars, like, so then you get a zero waste snack bar. You're not in everything in foil. And, I live right next to an elementary school, and we try really hard, but I walk my dog every day around the school grounds before the kids are at school, and I pick up trash, because and it's always those blooming energy bars, right? Because we need them and they're good, but there are just little things. So why not work together with your class, your community, inspired by this, and start having a look? What are other people doing? What are some ideas that we could implement, and turn that into a group research project for your entire class, that feels relevant to your place and your space and what your capabilities are in that moment? And that can be amazing. Some people like the Aiken and Oak Forest School were asking about volunteer opportunities for youth and adults. And maybe we could just close with that, because that's another like taking action piece. And here, we have invasive species. They're a big thing that we can work on with climate change. But some of those species actually have like great medicinal properties. So you can do different stuff, make tinctures, make lip balms, but still take it out of the environment, because they overcompete with some of the natural native plants, and the pollinators are like a lock and key, and they can't make friends with these invasive plants. Or writing letters to your local municipality, asking for more signage against idling, or designing your own signage. I don't know, those are some things we've done. What do you think, Chúk?
Yeah, I think honestly, mobilizing is a really powerful tool, right? Because in mobilizing, we're forming community as we take on climate action. So when looking for volunteer opportunities, I think there's a couple of key things. One, when you're not being paid for your time, you should not be exploited. And so, if you find that you are losing sleep, you're having to pull all-nighters, you're having to basically sacrifice your own well-being for this volunteer opportunity, it's not worth it. Please quit. You're being taken advantage of. If you're doing the work that someone should be paid to do, quit. You should be paid. But as you volunteer, volunteering should be about learning. Volunteering should be a learning opportunity, especially when you are in middle school, especially when you're in high school. Volunteering should be a learning opportunity. And so no matter who you volunteer with, as you look for these opportunities, make sure that you are engaged in a way that allows you to learn, right? You're not just getting people coffee, you're not just sort of sitting in meetings and like watching people speak to each other, but you're actively being engaged in a learning process, in hands-on, on the ground learning. And then the other piece is make sure that what you're doing feels meaningful. Right, volunteering is not the same as training, right? Like when you watch Karate Kid and he's told, like, you need to wipe a car, because when you learn the wiping motion, then you can karate chop someone easier, or something along those lines. And that's like valuable for like a training process. But again, volunteering is not equivalent to training. And so if the work you're doing doesn't feel meaningful to you, doesn't necessarily mean the work isn't meaningful, but it also just might mean that that's not the avenue in which you need to be engaged, recognizing that everyone has different talents, different skills, and different interests. So, look for volunteer opportunities. I volunteered a lot in high school, but I also did a lot of different types of volunteering to see which felt right. And it's some that, I was just like, this is not, this is not it. I will not give those examples because they are meaningful. It just wasn't for me. And then there were some that I was just like, I'm really enjoying the intentionality I'm able to put into this. Like, I'm really enjoying how I'm able to think about it. It's one of the ones that really hit me was I used to volunteer as a chef for the Ronald McDonald House in my local community. And for those who don't know, Ronald McDonald House is where allows people who have children who are sick to stay in the house free of charge as a way of minimizing all the expenses, given that they're oftentimes out of their home community and, worried about a loved one and they can't be paying for a hotel room the entire time. And so once a week, kids from my school would go in and would cook them dinner for free. And so what I loved about that process was we got to be very intentional about the ingredients that we picked, where we sourced those ingredients from, right? So we were going to farmers markets, we were having conversations with farmers. I learned so much about where food comes from, what food certifications are like, right? Like it's, when you go shopping for eggs, for example, you'll see like organic, not organic, and you're like, oh, is the organic better? Don't take it from me, but no, it's not really better, right? There's a certification that a lot of like small-time farmers are not able to afford to have. So, and that's what it is. But, we'd have conversations about like, when you meet farmers, you're like, okay, how do you keep your chickens? Are they free range? Are they suffering? Are they struggling? Are they hormones? And then you get to know the farmer one-on-one. And once you get to know the farmer one-on-one, you're like, give me your eggs. Sir, I trust you. I trust you with my stomach. I trust you with my intestines. I trust you with these other people's stomachs and intestines, right? You start like buying like your meats and your vegetables, and you get to know these people and you get to know where the food comes from, and it connects you directly with the food. And so it was just like a very meaningful experience for me in that sense. That being said, though, there's many people who I volunteered with who absolutely hated it. They were like, oh my God, I hate cooking. This sucks. This is not great. And that's entirely valid. It just wasn't for them. So all that to say, as you volunteer, find work that feels meaningful. If it doesn't feel meaningful, find something else. Don't suffer. You're not being paid, so don't suffer. And put intentionality into your work. I think, you know what, to wrap this up, if there's one thing you take from this hour-long conversation, it is intentionality. It is put intention into what it is that you do and the choices that you make, and recognize the implications of those choices, because as Jade said earlier, multiple things can be true at the same time, right? I taught a class on fashion environment at the University of Ottawa, and a student said, I'm vegan. And I'm like, that's cool, right? But when you're vegan, a lot of times, if you enact your veganism in clothing, a lot of times you have to go with synthetic fabrics instead of natural fabrics, simply because you don't want to use any animal products. And then as a function of that, your clothing contributes to microplastics in the ocean. But at the same time, there's a lot of positive benefits to veganism and a vegan lifestyle. And so recognizing that multiple things can be true at the same time and being very intentional about the choices you make, and then recognize the downsides of the choices you make, not to guilt yourself, that's not the goal of it, but to acknowledge that your choice is not perfect and to open up avenues for improving that choice as you get the knowledge that allows you to improve that choice.
Amazing. When you know better, do better, right? It takes stages, and we're all going to make mistakes, and we're all going to have these things. Beautiful. Living with intention, going out, taking action. And for people who didn't get their questions asked about what they can do, go into your local community, Google it, get those kids, they're epic researchers on it. What organizations, groups, people locally need our support, and go and find them and connect with them. Chúk, amazing chat. I could just talk to you forever. The first time we chatted, we were like on Zoom, just having a party. And I'm really excited. Chúk's going to be speaking at the National Outdoor Learning Conference we're having in May next year. And it's just good times. I'm sorry, Steph, we went over.
That's okay. I was having such a good time listening and learning, and I'm just imagining all of the conversations and the action that is going to come out of this. So I think 5 extra minutes is no problem based on just the amazing insights and the things that was shared today. So I appreciate it. And folks who had to leave early, they can catch up on the recording. Maybe you're watching the recording right now. So I have so much gratitude to you both. Thank you so much. Oh, wonderful. I mean, we have prizes to give away too, so we're keeping just the good vibes going here, and all the little reactions coming in the chat. Thank you, everybody. I'll keep it brief here and wrap it up in a few moments. We have prizes to give away from a few of the folks that answered questions, randomly selected 4 of you. And I'm just going to say thank you to the organizations who helped donate some of these prizes. So the Outdoor Learning Store, thanks to Jade and everybody at the Outdoor Learning Store for helping donate prizes for the whole week. So if you come back, if you didn't win today, you might win another time this week. Mountain Equipment Company also is helping us out a lot this week, and they're donating prizes today too. And also Outdoor Play Canada is donating prizes for today, some memberships today. So thank you. I put their links in the chat if you want to learn more. And that's what helps make Take Me Outside free and fun. And we couldn't really do it without all of our partners. So I do really appreciate that. And I'm going to announce the 4 prize winners now. So if you want, you can send us your email in the chat, set it to host and panelists. And otherwise, I will also put our email into the chat if you want to send us photos or you want to stay in touch or ask questions, anything like that. There's our email. So the first winner who won in a $25 gift certificate to the Outdoor Learning Store is Kirsten Rudik. And congrats, Kirsten, and your class, a teacher at AEMS. Congrats. The winner of the MEC gift card is Liz Replinger. Congratulations. And we randomly drew from everyone who asked questions, not just necessarily if your question was asked. So congratulations, Ms. Bickerstaff's class, who did get their question answered. And it was a fantastic question. Thank you for sending it in. And Acorn and Oak Forest School, those last 2 winners won a membership to Outdoor Play Canada. So I will be in touch with more details if you were one of the winners. And if you are able to join us for the rest of the week, we have Take Me Outside Day officially is tomorrow. So that will be a fantastic, fun event with Remy Rodden giving us a fantastic celebration. And we have our theme of health and well-being on Thursday and 2 more amazing speakers happening then. So we hope you can join us for that. And we'll be in touch soon with more the recording and all the stuff you need. But we really appreciate you being here and joining in and participating. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you so much. Happy Take Me Outside Week.